Hello, Miami alumni and friends. Thank you for joining us today. We are very excited to present another webinar. Miami Presents Sustainability on Campus, and I'm very excited to be joined by Olivia Herron today, who is Miami's Director of Sustainability on Campus, and she's going to walk through all the amazing things that we've been doing and will be doing at Miami to help with a sustainable future, reduce carbon emissions and whatnot. So we are very excited. She's got pictures and slides, and so we'll get to that in just a second. A few quick things before that. Thank you to those of you that submitted questions beforehand. We will try to get to as many of those as we can, and we also welcome your questions live. So if you want to ask questions of Olivia during the presentation, feel free to use the Ask a Question button below your video. And I'm going to give two quick plugs for events coming up. This week on Thursday, we have Rita Dove, who's a Miami alum and the first Black Poet Laureate of the United States, joining the community on campus through video. So if you can make it to watch that, that's Thursday at 4 online or in person. And then also this week is the deadline to sign up for the Women's Symposium. On Friday is the last day to sign up for this year's Miami Women Symposium, which is Friday, April 3rd. Ton of great segments lined up for that. So live viewers, just wanted to make sure you had a chance to see that before we start. All right, let's get back to Olivia here. I'm so pleased to be joined by Olivia, who is a two-time Miami grad, who also, in addition to her bachelor's, then got her master's of environmental science at Miami. And we are lucky to have her stay and work then at Miami, she's almost 2 years into being the sustainability director of sustainability at Miami. There we go. I'll throw it up for you. And so with that, Olivia, I'll pass it off to you. We'll get your slides up and get going. Then I'll see you at the end for questions.
Wonderful. Awesome. Well, happy Earth Day. Thank you for joining us to learn a little bit more about Miami's recent commitment to carbon neutrality by 2040. We are very proud of this goal. It is the soonest carbon neutrality date of any Ohio public university, and we are well on our way to accomplishing this goal. So for those who aren't aware, President Crawford signed what is called the President's Climate Leadership Commitment in September of 2020, a little bit later than originally planned. That was going to be signed on Earth Day of 2020, but we could not have planned the COVID-19 pandemic and all that was to come. So we continue to make progress. As part of this commitment, we had to draft a climate action plan, which is due to our governing body, Second Nature, next month. By the end of May of 2024. All of the substantial work is done, and I have gotten to turn that over to University Communications and Marketing, who are making it a much prettier document than I possibly could have, adding all of the images and graphics and things we like to see. So it's not just the boring Word doc that I submitted to them. We had to establish a carbon neutrality target, which, as I just said, is 2040. And then we also conducted a campus community resilience assessment, which is understanding things that already exist in Oxford that will make us resilient to climate change. And why are we doing this now? Well, Gen Z is more likely than any other generation to say that climate change is their top personal concern. And 85% of college students have been polled and said that it is at least somewhat a priority for their campus to be working on sustainability. We're also very interested in some research coming out of the Yale School of Management, which is showing that large majorities of business students want to see experiential learning, case studies on sustainability, and to have career services offered to them so that they can apply what they've learned in business to topics like ESG and making corporations more sustainable. And as I mentioned, we have been very successful in our work to date on sustainability, thanks to our Campus Utility Master Plan. Coming out of the 2008 financial crisis, Miami was looking for ways to save money on our campus infrastructure. And it just so happens to be that when you are using less electricity, you are saving money and you are reducing your environmental impact. So as we have been on this utility master plan journey, we have reduced our energy-based emissions by over 50% as of this year, which is a huge accomplishment. We have reduced emissions 62.5% when you are looking at per gross square foot. And I'll show some graphs of that soon. As many of you know, if you've been on campus recently, Miami continues to grow. Just this academic year, we added 500,000 gross square feet with the addition of the McVeigh Data Science Building and the new Clinical Health Sciences Building, which hosts our nursing program. So we like to think about how efficient we can be even in spite of this growth that we're experiencing. And maybe most importantly and most impressively, we have saved over $100 million in this time as a result of these energy savings and sustainability initiatives. But it is time that we spread that across the Miami community through our curriculum, our research, our outreach both to stakeholders on campus like students and faculty, but also to folks like yourself, our alumni, and the larger community. So here is a chart of that savings to date that I was just describing. And it does only go out to 2022, but I can assure you that we have surpassed the $100 million in savings mark. And then I am going to move into those emissions data that I just shared with you. But we're going to go back to school for just a minute. So maybe pretend, envision your favorite classroom when you were a student here at Miami. And we're going to go back to school so that we make sure everyone knows what I mean when I say that we are reducing our emissions and where they come from. So an important concept that we all should understand is a carbon footprint, which is something that, I can do as an individual for my household, but as part of my job, I do it for all of Miami University. The average American emits 16 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalents per year. And maybe just keep that number of 16 tons per year in your mind, because in a few slides, I'm going to show you what the emissions are for the entire university, and that will help give you a little bit of context. I also always remind students when I'm doing classroom visits that they will see CO2 equivalents, because it would be very confusing if I got up here and told you the emissions of every single type of greenhouse gas that we do measure. For instance, methane, which is often talked about, is 25 times more potent than CO2. So with a little bit of math on the back end, we convert everything into CO2 equivalents just for ease of conversation. And then we also divide our emissions into 3 scopes, which you can see here on the screen. So scope 1 are our direct emissions. They are coming from us actually burning fossil fuels on campus. So that's things like our fleet vehicles. If a plumber goes out to fix something in a residence hall in one of the classic red Miami vans, the fuel that he is using is part of our scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 are the easiest scope for me to describe to you, and students say that at the very least they always remember that one because it is purchased electricity. So it's just what we buy off the grid from Duke Energy, who's our provider here in Oxford. And then scope 3 is the funniest scope of all because it is everything else. And we have had to limit what we count for scope 3 in accordance with the president's climate leadership commitments. I'll show that here in just a couple of slides. But that gives you some important context for the information that I'm about to share about emissions. Another thing that I like to share with students that I think is very important is who's emitting in the world. The atmosphere doesn't have country boundaries, or certainly not something as small as university boundaries. So I also like to provide the context of here's where emissions are coming from within the world. We follow in that big USA box, but it's important to have this context, especially for the students I speak with, right? Miami University can't solve climate change alone. We have to be working with others regionally within the state, the country, and ultimately climate change is a global problem. And then what types of things are producing emissions? This graph is also very helpful. Miami likes to say that we're very data-driven in our sustainability endeavors, meaning that we measure emissions and then we try to tailor our projects to have the greatest bang for our buck. We want to reduce as much emissions as we possibly can as we're making changes to our campus infrastructure. And if you're looking at the bottom of that big energy bubble, which is about 73% of global emissions, you see energy use in buildings. Energy use in buildings is also the greatest source of emissions here at Miami University. So I just like to provide this context because we map pretty neatly onto global averages about where emissions are coming from. Miami is basically just a tiny city, and so we are a great scalable context for students and community members to be learning about how an organization can address climate change. So here are our emissions for the last few years. 2019 was used instead of 2020, and we left a few years out because lo and behold, if we have no students here, the dormitories are closed, we are using a lot less electricity than we are when classes are in session. So we do omit the pandemic because it just doesn't quite line up with the reality of what campus looks like when it is fully operational. But just since 2019, we have reduced all of our emissions across campus by 13%, which is very impressive. I have the scopes mapped on here for you to describe what those were. As I just shared with you, this is on-site. So this blue bar is natural gas that we are burning primarily in the old steam plant on Western Campus. It's been operational since 1973. So many of you, I'm sure, have seen it, although we are set to decommission that plant in 2028. So a big change coming. And I'm going to, at the end, have some details about that. Scope 2 is that purchased electricity. It's our biggest source of emissions, but that means we have some awesome opportunities as solar becomes more affordable to reduce some of these Scope 2 emissions by producing our own electricity on site. And then these Scope 3 emissions that we're required to disclose for the President's Climate Leadership Commitment are commuting for faculty, staff, and students. The yellow bar is student commuting, which is quite small because, as you all know, most of our students, first and second years, are living in the residence halls. They're not commuting every day. And the rest of our upperclassmen are primarily living here in Oxford, so they are also not commuting every day. I don't have Scope 3 emissions going back as long as I do Scope 1 and 2 because they require that we survey students and faculty and staff about their commute to campus. But I do have data for Scope 1 and 2, which are the vast majority of our emissions, going all the way back to 2008. Now, some important things that you will see, we started to experience a big drop in 2017, right around that time, and that can be attributed to a transition from burning coal at the steam plant to natural gas, just a less carbon intensive fuel. So some of our drop in emissions can be seen there. This little jump in 2022 is actually reflective of that missing data that I was just talking about from COVID. So our emissions didn't actually go up significantly in 2022. You just see that increase because we had an artificial drop during the pandemic. And this shows the difference that I was just describing to you between emissions and emissions per square foot. So this is demonstrating that we are a little over 60% more efficient per square foot at operating our buildings than we were when we started on this endeavor in 2008 to be more energy efficient. And this is especially impressive when you learn that as part of our long-range housing plan that was happening at the same time, we are now air conditioning all 46, just about. There's a few left. A few stragglers that are in the next few years, but essentially all of our 46 residence halls now have air conditioning. So we are actually seeing an increased load, right? We're doing more climate controlling, and yet we're using 60% less energy, which is a true testament to the excellent engineers we have here in physical facilities. Okay, so this is just written out in words, some of the things that I was just sharing with you. So when we say we're going to be carbon neutral by 2040, that means that we are going to eliminate or otherwise deal with emissions from fuels burned on site, from purchased electricity, and then those indirect emissions that I just shared with you. And as a result, our climate action plan is shaped around those things. We are following the emissions, and then we are also doing some other very equally important work in terms of education, outreach, and student engagement. So I'm just going to walk you through Miami's climate action plan, give you some high-level information about how we plan to address our emissions. So the first and largest category is that one that we've been out the longest with the utility master plan to decarbonize our energy infrastructure. It's already down more than 50%, but we have a ways to go. And the great news is we have an excellent plan to do it. So one big thing has been campus building renovations. I'm sure that many of you share my experience. I lived in Scott Hall my first year here. It was not a renovated dorm like the students live in now. I had a steam radiator, and if it got too hot in my dorm in the winter, we were told to open up the windows to let some of that hot air out. They were only single pane on really nasty winter days. We would get icicles on the little wood slats between the windows, and we know that that meant we were losing a lot of heat. There is also a long-standing legend, I guess we would call it, that Miami heats our sidewalks. We do, but not on purpose. That is actually heat loss from the 14 miles of steam lines that follow our sidewalks and had historically been used to heat all of our buildings. The great news is we're already 70% of the way there with getting buildings off of steam. But in order for them to receive low temperature hot water, which is something like 130 degrees, instead of the steam that's coming from boiling water to very high temperatures, the buildings have to be insulated, have good windows, and undergo those types of renovations that we've seen across campus over the last 15 to 20 years. And here is a map of what this looks like today. I don't have a historic map for you because if I did, every single building would be red and it would not be very interesting. So you can just imagine that in 2008, every building on this map was red. But today, the yellow buildings have already been converted over to heating hot water. And then the green buildings on our western campus have been transitioned to geothermal. Here is what the campus is going to look like in 2028. You're going to say, Olivia, your map says 2027. And that is because we did not account for the COVID-19 pandemic in all of these construction documents. So it has been pushed out a year due to COVID, but it is still quite the impressive feat that we are going to have so much of our campus heated and cooled using the earth as a battery, where we can be exchanging heat between buildings rather than producing what is dangerous and quite costly at the steam plant. So we're very, very proud of this work. We cannot wait for folks to visit in 2028 when we can say that we are a steam-free campus, and we hope to continue updating you about this progress. Bachelor Hall is the next slated to be converted as it's being renovated. That hall will be taken offline this summer and tied back to the western plant. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit more about the geothermal that is coming to North Campus in front of Millette Hall. So emissions from commuting and university financed air travel at their peak account for about 16% of our emissions. They're those three little bars at the top, the dark orange, teal, and yellow. So this is all about how we can increase the sustainability of the way folks commute to campus. This is also an excellent place for me to plug the fact that the city of Oxford has also committed to carbon neutrality by 2045. And so we are working in great collaboration with them to address especially these types of emissions, because I have no control over where, for instance, our faculty choose to live. And maybe that means they have a very long commute. So Oxford has been doing some work to encourage development that would provide affordable housing for folks like maybe custodians or dining service workers in Oxford to reduce their commutes. There are all kinds of initiatives to encourage faculty to live in the community. And those are one small example of how we might eliminate some faculty staff emissions. We are also doing lots of education around reminding students about the free bus service that is available to them on campus. And if you have been to Miami anytime in recent history, you know that the student parking lots are not so conveniently located that it would make sense to walk from your dorm to a parking lot and then drive back to campus where there really isn't any parking available near the academic buildings. So there are lots of things going on to try to encourage folks to reduce their commuting emissions. And we know just on national trends of things, for instance, more people driving electric vehicles having greater fuel efficiency standards. We also expect some of those to naturally decrease in the next 16 years of this plan as well. Offsetting Miami's remaining emissions is perhaps the most discussed topic of our climate action plan, but we have taken a very science-based target approach, meaning that we want to eliminate 90%, at least 90% of Miami's emissions, rather than purchasing carbon offsets as some other organizations have chosen to do to become carbon neutral. That means we are doing this the hard way, but we are very proud to be improving the student experience, engaging the community, improving the infrastructure of campus, rather than sending our money elsewhere to do environmental work. Student engagement and outreach is another very exciting, perhaps my favorite part of both my job and the climate action plan. The greatest legacy that Miami can have for sustainability is not in reducing our 80,000 some metric tons of emissions, but rather teaching our students why we are doing that, how we are doing it, and then giving them the skills that they need to go out to their future employers and be sustainability leaders. So we are trying to lead by example and engage as many students as possible in this process. Education and research is another very exciting opportunity. Outside of the climate action plan, there is another report that you would be welcome to check out. It is called STARS, which stands for the Sustainability Tracking Assessment Rating System. We love acronyms in the sustainability in higher ed field. But this is an assessment that has been done by hundreds of universities, primarily in North America, to assess our sustainability. And that is really what shapes our education and research. I am currently working with the Provost's office to get a current state assessment. So far, 11 department chairs have responded to me in the last few days. So this is something very front of mind for me right now, but working to ensure that any student, regardless of major, can learn how sustainability is related to what they choose to study here at Miami. Another great way that we're doing that is through what is now being called a signature inquiry. So more recent graduates might remember the thematic sequence. It has not changed too much, but is now called a signature inquiry and requires that students pick 3 classes in a themed area. They only have 5 themes that they can choose from, and one of them is sustainability. So that is all just to say that we are putting an emphasis on the importance of students having literacy around sustainability as it relates to their field, because we are seeing future employers want students to understand how their finance degree or their accountancy degree or their engineering program relates to sustainability. So we are ensuring that they have that opportunity through this new signature inquiry program. Okay, so that is my information on the climate action plan explicitly, but I wanted to share this very exciting opportunity with the geothermal groundbreaking set to commence very, very soon. We are just waiting for commencement, and once students are off campus, we will begin. So not to confuse you, the picture on the left is from when we drilled for geothermal on Western Campus. Nothing has started at Millette yet. So I just wanted to provide an example so that you could envision what it will look like when this work commences. But the picture on the right is a current picture of Millette today. So we have put up the construction fences and they have banners on them explaining to students that this is all part of our carbon neutrality work, that we're installing 520 geothermal wells there in the lawn in front of Millette. Each of those wells will be 850 feet deep and will be connected to the chiller plant that is currently in Billings Hall, which used to be the natatorium on campus. It will be completed by summer of 2026. And just this project alone will eliminate over 5,000 metric tons of emissions per year. So very, very exciting project that will be commencing very soon and helping us progress in our efforts to carbon neutrality by 2040. And JJ is going to pull up the website that we are constantly updating with information for you. So please, if you would like to follow our progress or learn more, definitely check out our website. There is even a special page now dedicated to the project at Millette where you can get project updates there. The sustainability one-pager is a summary of my climate action plan, because I assume that you probably don't want the 30-page Word version that I sent UCM, and the pretty version is not out yet, but they created a very nice summary for you. And then we also have a dashboard. You can see now some of that data summarized from the dashboard, but we are constantly posting our emissions every year to keep this entire process transparent. And some of the graphs might even look familiar to what I was showing you today. So please be sure to check those out. And then I'm a bit ahead of schedule, but it looks like we have lots of questions coming in the chat. So if JJ doesn't mind joining me, I can begin answering some of those.
I would be happy to. Thank you so much for the presentation and for all your hard work on behalf of Miami and the Earth. I forgot to mention it was Earth Day, so thank you for adding that in too. Obviously, we're excited to celebrate with you. All right. So let's get started with some questions. This is from Anthony. Besides energy use, how is Miami constructing low energy buildings, reducing solid waste, avoiding toxic chemicals, and integrating sustainability into all academic departments?
Yes, so I covered a little bit of that. We talked about integration into academics, but low energy buildings are certainly a priority. A lot of folks don't know, but as a state entity, we follow different building codes than you do if you wanted to build a new house, for example. So the state of Ohio requires at minimum that we build to LEED Silver standards, which is the U.S. Green Building Council's rules and regulations, so to speak, for sustainable buildings. And we put a lot of effort with our designers into the sustainability of buildings. Some little examples of that have turned out to be extremely impactful have been in the residence halls. We now have occupancy sensors and sensors on all of their windows. So if a student is blasting the heat in the winter and then suddenly decides to open their window and let in the cold air, we kick off the heat so that we're not just blasting that hot air outside. And then there are the occupancy sensors turn off their lights if they haven't been in the room for more than, I believe, 20 minutes. So just some checks and balances, so to speak, to prevent students from accidentally leaving their lights on when they go home for Christmas break, right? There are certainly lots of savings there. Solid waste is a big topic on campus. If you are interested in learning more about that, I highly recommend checking out the Campus Race to Zero Waste, which was founded here at Miami over 20 years ago. It was formerly known as Recycle Mania, so that name might be more familiar to alumni. We've been participating in this competition a long time. We just Did it again this year. So when students got back from their January term for 8 weeks until they went to spring break, Rumpke, our waste provider, actually weighed all recyclables coming out of the campus for 8 whole weeks. We recycled about 220,000 pounds of recyclable items in 8 weeks, which is pretty neat to see. So we are certainly thinking about that. And unfortunately, toxic chemicals do come with the nature sometimes of having a chemistry department, right? Obviously, we're doing it safely. I'm not trying to suggest we're not, but that is just the nature of having research labs and chemicals and things. But we have a wonderful environmental health and safety team that I get to work with on a regular basis to make sure that those are all being processed and treated appropriately. It is a whole thing that before I worked in this role, I had no idea. I never thought about what happened when you left your chemistry lab to all of the materials that were left over. And it turns out that is quite the elaborate operation. So it is certainly something that we are thinking about.
Sounds good. Let's stick with waste. We had one more from Douglas asking, I'm curious to learn about how food waste is managed.
Yes. So very exciting information to share about food waste too. So this is the first year that Miami has had a chapter of the Food Recovery Network, which is a national organization, but we just have a student club, so to speak, of that group. They have taken 10,000 pounds so far this year of food that would have been wasted. For example, let's say the dining hall was going to have lasagna for dinner. They cooked 3 pans of lasagna. They only ended up using 2 of them. There is now a process in all the dining halls that they know to deep freeze that food. And then 3 times per week, volunteers are coming around to all the dining halls, collecting those extras. And they are, if they're individually packaged, then they go to the campus food pantry in the Nellie Craig Walker building. Some of it goes to TOPS, the Talawanda Oxford pantry here in Oxford, but oftentimes the really big pans of food that are not individually portioned are going to Hamilton, to the Open Hands Soup Kitchen to feed homeless folks in our nearby community.
Great. All right, one that came in ahead of time from Scott, you kind of talked about, but he asks about plans for Miami to implement renewable energy into resource mix. So yeah, do we know what the renewable energy mix is going to be in 2040 and what it is now? A little bit more about that would be great.
Yes, very exciting, Scott. I'm glad you brought this up because we are actually in the process of hiring a firm to bring some solar to Miami's campus. So we have a short list of 3 firms. 2 of them are being interviewed today. So we are right in the middle of this process. And once we select a firm and have them hired, then obviously things really get rolling, which is very, very exciting. So we are looking at every possible site you can think of for appropriate use of solar. The site that I am personally most excited about as a prospective location that we're having them map out. Obviously, you know, we have to look at ROI and all the reasonable things that you do in selecting a project. But where I hope to see solar, if it pencils out, is over the geothermal well field on the western campus. Because we have those wells in the ground going hundreds of feet deep, we can never build there. If there was a leak, we have to be able to access it, but solar provides the amount of access that is needed. So it's an awesome way that we can utilize about 3 acres of land that can never become anything else. And then what a neat story we get to tell. We already do sometimes 5 tours of the geothermal plant a week for classes, but it would be pretty awesome if, in addition to learning about geothermal technology, they were able to simultaneously be learning more about solar energy. It's also a unique engineering challenge that, as an institution of higher ed, we have kind of the know-how to do a complicated project, and we would love to be an example to the collegiate community and beyond that you can successfully implement solar above a geothermal well field. It just takes a little bit of planning. They're 20 feet on center for anyone who knows about planning and logistics. So it's a fun mapping challenge, essentially, of how do we avoid the geothermal that's there and also maximize the site to get as much solar as possible.
Yeah, awesome. And a lot of that, the well that's already there on Western is a pond right now, right? So that's part of the engineering
Yes.
plan to figure that out. Yeah, okay. And what's the size comparison between the geothermal field there and the new one that's going in at Millette?
Yes. So it's a little bit of a tricky question because technology has improved a lot. Our Western plant was brought online in 2014. Those wells are just over 600 feet deep. We are now going over 800 feet deep because the trucks are available and it's more affordable now to go deeper than it was 10 years ago. But in terms of capacity, it is currently phased to be a little bit bigger than the Western plant. For those who don't know, on Western, we actually did it in 2 phases. So we did one phase of well drilling, brought some buildings online, and then did another phase of well drilling as more buildings got renovated. And there is possibility, although it's not yet scheduled, we have some design plans for a possible phase 2 for the Millette project. So if we reach a point where enough buildings are renovated and we need more capacity, there is space to even further expand that plant.
Awesome. Okay, cool. And another question related to that was from Steven. And he asked, why was the West Millette parking lot not chosen for the geothermals?
Yes.
The site that was chosen is the
The lawn on the south side.
main area in front of Millette, right? Pointed up
Yes.
towards Talawanda. So why not the parking lot?
Yes, so Steve knows a few things. I can tell by this question because we did float the idea of doing it in the parking lot as opposed to in the grass. And there are a couple of reasons why we ultimately decided to shift that. One is that we realized we had the option to go deeper than we did on the Western campus. So we were looking at a larger footprint of wells. And when we realized we could go deeper and shrink the footprint, it mapped nicely onto the lawn area in front of Millette. Another big sustainability co-benefit of relocating the project is that in order to accommodate the amount of parking that we need on campus, we were going to have to close the Millette parking lot for 18 months, which would have required that we build a new parking lot. We were going to very significantly expand the size of the current Chestnut Fields parking lot. So we were going to lose the recreation field behind that space to accommodate more temporary parking. And then we had all of this additional expense of ripping up asphalt. And then it turned out it was going to be very expensive to repave after we did the geothermal. So rather than having to build extra swing parking, which ultimately we felt as a sustainability committee might result in more people bringing cars to campus. And I just told you all about how we are trying to get less commuting. So we didn't feel like building a whole new 200 car lot was sending the right message to students that we want to see less commuting. And ultimately, there's some pretty sizable cost savings of not ripping up and repaving a parking lot, whereas here we're just ripping up grass and we'll replant grass.
All right. Sounds good. So we have a couple more and we have time for a few more if anyone watching still wants to punch in a live question. This one's from Valerie, and she asks, why can't Miami put solar panels over its asphalt parking lots to shade parked cars? The Cincinnati Zoo did this, and it seems like a good way to cover green space. Green space.
Yes. So we do look to the Cincinnati Zoo as a model, but they are certainly situated differently than we are. They have a very small space, and the only place they had left to put solar was on their parking lots. Miami owns over 2,000 acres of land in Oxford, so we are not as squeezed for space as the Cincinnati Zoo is. And a canopy mount solar panel is right now about double the price for the same capacity of pole mount. So we can have twice as many solar panels for the same amount of money if they are in an open space like the geothermal well field, as opposed to on a parking lot. We have still in that call for projects that we put out that we're interviewing for today. We did have a couple of potential parking lot sites there. So we are continuing to evaluate the feasibility, but from what we've seen so far, it's exactly double the price. And there are some interesting new opportunities that we're considering with the Inflation Reduction Act, where Miami would be eligible for 30% of project costs to come back on eligible work. And there are some limitations around domestic content, meaning the products had to be created in the US. And at least from what we've been hearing right now, it's easier to source ground mount panels domestically than it is the canopy. So canopy is great if you don't have room, but we have lots of room, and therefore we can pursue something that's about half the price and will get us a tax credit if we go ground mount as opposed to canopy.
Okay. All right. I have two public transportation questions for you. One from Max. Does the BCRTA fleet play into your emissions calculations? That's Butler County Regional Transit Authority. Are you looking into working with them to try to encourage a more sustainable fleet for their on-campus routes, at least, maybe like fuel cell or electric buses?
Yes. So I do work closely with the BCRTA, but their emissions do not come into my greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Rather, they are in the cities. So I work very closely with the city's sustainability coordinator, Rena Murphy. And when she calculates the greenhouse gas emissions inventory for Oxford, which does include Miami, she includes the BCRTA routes. We do not, because we don't own or operate the buses. So we are using that soft power, so to speak, to try to influence them to do what we know is the right thing and transition away from ICE or internal combustion engine buses. There is a lot of work going on with BCRTA right now, especially in pursuing grants for electric buses is what they are looking at. I don't think they're interested in fuel cell that I am aware of. But for those who do not know, there is a new bus depot being built in Oxford adjacent to the Chestnut Field parking lot, or right next to SDS Pizza, if you know where that is at in Oxford, to have infrastructure there such that they would be able to charge electric buses. So we are starting to build the infrastructure to be able to support that in our community. They just had a groundbreaking, I want to say in January, because I remember it being cold, but I can't tell you the date. But just recently, we broke ground on having infrastructure to support electric buses once they get the funding to be able to convert their fleet.
Right. And that leads me to the second part, which is that same station is also going to be working with Amtrak to have a passenger train stop in Oxford, correct?
That is the goal and the vision.
Okay.
There has been all kinds of planning on the part of the city where I'm very grateful that we're just a supporting partner, and I'm not the one doing that paperwork because boy, are there a lot of rules about how to bring a train station somewhere. I guess that makes sense. I just never considered it before. So our friends at the City of Oxford are working through all of that at this time, but they did receive some pretty hefty grant funding, something like $2.5 million from the state, I believe, to support us in bringing a station to Oxford, which would be wonderful. Our largest city, I believe, JJ will know better than I do, where students are coming that's outside of Ohio, I believe is Chicago. And the train runs from Chicago and actually currently passes through Oxford. We just don't have anywhere for them to stop every day. So it would be awesome if students coming from Chicago had a way to get here without having to bring their own vehicle.
Yep. Awesome. Okay. One more quick one, I think. I was hoping you could just talk a little bit more about carbon offsets, because we hear a lot about them. You mentioned it as an opportunity where people buy, offset their carbon by paying. What does that look like? What do you pay for with a carbon offset? And, what are the pros and cons of those?
Absolutely. So this is a hotly debated topic right now in popular culture. So we've probably heard about big companies like Microsoft or Apple who have committed to carbon neutrality, and they don't actually know how to make a carbon neutral iPhone. I know how to heat and cool Miami's buildings without producing emissions. So for those who do not have the awesome engineering team that I have behind me, they are turning to carbon offsets. It's important to know if you've ever seen a university promoting that they're already carbon neutral, they are doing that using carbon offsets. Miami is trying to avoid them to the best of our ability as long as possible. So it is written in our climate action plan that we won't start considering carbon offsets at all until 2035. So we want to see how far we can get actually eliminating emissions here on the Oxford campus before we consider offsets at all. Although there are some things, especially university financed air travel, I'm not confident that there are going to be tons of carbon neutral planes in 2040 that when faculty want to go to a conference or we send folks to our Luxembourg campus, like that is one area where we expect we may have to purchase carbon offsets, but their reputability is something that has been called into question recently. I believe it was Microsoft who was buying tons of offsets to protect the Amazon rainforest. And it turned out that the trees were not in danger. They were in a national park. So, those offsets were determined to be kind of bogus. And that is something that we're both really trying to educate students on, how to be critical thinkers when you hear that a company says that they're going to be carbon neutral. That's why we've committed to at least 90% of our emissions being eliminated on site, meaning we can't even buy more than 10% to be offset with with offsets. There are certainly reputable companies doing this, but you just have to turn a critical eye to think about what types of projects they're doing when they say that they're either removing emissions or preventing them. It is a growing industry that's still pretty new. There are governing bodies, like voluntary ones, coming up all the time, but so far there aren't any like national laws, for instance, regulating them. So we have given ourselves the next 11 years for things to play out in the market before we are going to even consider getting in that game.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for summarizing that and answering all our questions and for the great presentation. I think we've hit most of what's come in. So thank you for the audience for watching and participating and being a part of the Miami community as we all work together on this. Olivia, thank you so much. You're doing an amazing job with this project and everything that's going on with sustainability on campus. And we love when you come share it with us. So thank you so much for your time. Do you have any parting words for our audience?
Happy Earth Day, everyone. Thank you for joining us. And please let us know if you'd like to hear more. The Sustainability Committee does have some collaboration with alumni. So if you're interested in participating in some way, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. Yes, thank you. And thanks again, everybody, for watching. Stay tuned on our webinar platform here for other upcoming events. I mentioned Rita Dove, Poet Laureate, Miami alum coming Thursday. We also have the Miamiaki Conference and the Hawk Tank Symposium online next week if you want to watch more programs from Miami. And with that, I will say thanks again, Olivia, and love and honor. And we'll see you next time.